This is Sonic Ventures, a podcast celebrating the concept album format with Robert Goebel and Joël Tibbets.
Sonic Ventures is an evolving series of discussions that explore concept albums from a variety of artists and genres. Our intent here is to have celebratory conversations of our personal experiences with selected works and the issues and themes surrounding concept albums.
Sometimes, we will be treading familiar waters concerning music interpretation and creation. Other times, we will venture into different places of thought, emotion, and expression. We invite you to join us on our sonic venture. This is Season 2, Episode 5, Miles Davis's Bitches Brew. This conversation was recorded on June 9th, 2023. This is Joël, and well, something very new happened with this conversation. After recording a complete podcast episode of an hour and a half, followed by an aftercast that was also an hour and a half, Rob and I both left this conversation as though we had barely scratched the surface of talking about this album. Now, I know that for me, going into this conversation, there was a certain degree of vulnerability that I have not had with any other album, basically because of how significant this album has been through my life as a musician and a composer. And what surprised me is that when the conversation was over, I left myself looking for something that was missing, something that didn't happen, something that wasn't said, something that I didn't do, or something that I didn't pick up on. And over the last few days, as I've been thinking about that feeling, I realized that it's quite simply that we haven't finished talking about this album. But for sure, I was left with a very different feeling after having this conversation. And a part of it I'm very clear about is my own relationship with this album. It's been very close to my heart, and it's been very useful in my life. And I think that when I came to this conversation, there was a level or a depth of vulnerability that I wasn't really aware of. And so post the conversation, I am feeling that. I'm thinking about that. Because it's insight into myself, it's insight into the album, it's insight into my relationship with music, creating it and experiencing it. Now, as I said, we record a podcast and we record an aftercast. We invite you to check out our aftercasts. They're on our Patreon page. And there you will not only find more discussion beyond a podcast episode, we also have extras like what we call wildcards and vignettes that are extra material that are related to something that came up in an episode or something that was of importance to us in relationship to one of our conversations. The other thing is we also like to hear from you. We like to hear if you have any thoughts or questions, or to share your own anecdotal experiences and impressions of concept albums. So you can contact us through our email, sonicventurespodcast@gmail.com. We also have an Instagram page, Sonic Ventures Podcast. You can check that out. And you can also, if you feel inclined to, message us through our Patreon page. Either way that you choose to connect with us, we'd love to hear from you. And without further ado, our conversation about Miles Davis's Bitches Brew. Thanks for listening. We are rolling.
Here we are.
Again, yes.
Yeah, so after a couple of months, a little bit of a hiatus.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was definitely a good word for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. A pleasure to be in the room with you, Joël. And as folks might hear from the sonic quality of this room, it's a different room than we normally record in.
Very different.
and owing to a couple of factors. Number one is your neighbors decided to demo the house next door to where we regularly record.
Yeah, that would definitely come in on the recording.
Yeah, not necessarily a welcome thing to listen to heavy machinery knocking down houses. And then, of course, I have just completed a move. So this is a semi-empty room or a half-empty room with no sound treatment. This will be my studio at one point, but very reflective and echoey. But we think quiet. Or quiet enough to be able to do the podcast here. So
yeah, and it's nice to be on the ground floor of your new creative space.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to set this up as a creative space. Right now, it's just sort of standing in as the place I'm keeping the stuff that I will be using to be creative with. And as we get some layout and unpacking done to tune it up into a functional space. But until then, it's this nice sort of echo chamber.
But I think this is a nice, visceral, creative way to christen your space.
Yeah, well,
especially with the album that we're going to be talking about.
Absolutely, and I've yet to even plug a guitar into this since I've been in the space. So this is really the first creative occurrence that's happened here. So I'm very pleased to think of it that way. So welcome to my new home.
Oh, thank you.
And welcome to anyone that's listening for their return to Sonic Ventures. Mm-hmm. And this is Sonic Ventures Season 2, Episode 5. Yeah.
With the hiatus we had, it certainly changed up the rhythm for me of the podcast.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting pause to have. And considering that we're talking today about Miles Davis's Bitches Brew, for me, the fact that we're doing this album was already a big deal for me.
Yeah.
This album was another one that was on my initial shortlist for us doing this podcast together. But to actually spend the time that I did preparing for this conversation, because I've never had a conversation about Bitches Brew.
Wow.
Never. Like it's been a very personal album for me.
Yeah.
So to have that time to think about it, listen to it, do whatever research I needed to do, and then to stop for a while, and then to come and record the episode, I almost feel like, in a way, we're reenacting the recording of Bitches Brew, because there's this feeling of, I've done all this work, but I don't have the same relationship that I had with it initially when I thought we were going to record the episode. So
right, there was a sort of a break in the continuity of preparedness, right?
Yeah.
And the ramp up to things, and that's owing to a couple of factors. Many of those having to do with myself. People may remember from an earlier discussion that we had, but I brought up some health issues.
Right.
And long story short is that my health issues are such that I need my thyroid removed. And so I'm at the end of a process that went through the investigation stage of trying to determine whether or not I had cancer.
Right.
And what the relative urgency would be for getting a surgery to address the tumors in my thyroid. And the good news is, so far, no cancer. And
that is good news.
Very good news. But, of course, the tumors are large enough, and the additional problems with the thyroid are such that they've recommended complete removal. So that is, tough thing to sort of navigate and negotiate through, especially here at our midpoint in our lives, sort of middle age time period. So
and middle age of this season,
middle of the season, season 2. It's the middle of the second act.
But I want to say to that that's part of the reason why I think I intuitively knew I wanted to do this with you, is because we have an understanding about our creative lives and, well, creativity in our life, and that, you know, we're navigating these moments and these times as we do together in such a way that we look at the whole picture.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I really appreciate about working with you in terms of the podcast, but I'm sure in other respects creatively, is that you have a great sense of the multiplicity of dynamics that's in a person's life.
Yeah.
And so, you know, even when we talked about just taking a break and a hiatus, you know, the first thing I said is we'll find a way through it.
Yeah.
You know, and so I really appreciate how you're able to look at keeping yourself grounded, but also keeping yourself stimulated, playful, creative at the same time. And it's interesting for me in the sense that, you know, I too have had a few things in my life recently, and how we can look upon our creative work and our personal lives as, in a sense, kind of like they're interwoven.
Right.
So of course we have our own lives, but we have this way that we meet and engage, and in it we're creating other things while we're trying to maintain the other stuff in our lives, which interestingly sounds a lot like improvisation. What a segue.
Yeah, it's a very Bitches Brew for sure. Yeah. The other thing that was initially most dominant in our delay was a phenomenon not unique to Vancouver, but certainly very much part of Vancouver culture right now, is something called a renoviction.
Yes.
And that's
There's
when
a lot of that going on.
Yeah. Now, that's when your landlord decides that your rent is too low, but they can't legally hike the rent while you're still a tenant, and so they miraculously suddenly need your space, either to do renovations and or for their own use. And you know, funnily enough, most of those things take about 6 months to complete, which just happens to be the amount of time that it has to be off the market before they can re-rent it at a higher rate. So Vancouver is going through this phenomena right now of renovictions, and
I think I've seen articles about it happening elsewhere.
Yeah.
Globally. I mean, in just the way the economics of things are functioning right now.
Yeah.
I think that it seems to be for landlords or people who are in real estate and whatnot, there's a kind of, at least from what I've read, there's a kind of a global thing about that.
Yeah.
Renoviction.
Yeah, I've definitely heard reference to it in other cities. Mm-hmm. And our vacancy rates in Vancouver are very, very low. So it's not just the increase in cost that finding new housing is likely to drop on you, but it's also just the panic of being able to find a place. You know.
Yeah, that's a huge piece to it. And then just how people present what they have to offer. And you have to navigate how people voice what their concept of a 2-bedroom suite is. Versus another way to put it, which would be really 1 bedroom with barely a living room or something like that.
The quality and the quantity of spaces out there leave a lot to be desired. And in the panic of needing to find a place, I'm blessed to have some options, and my partner, my wife is great at helping navigate and getting on top of want ads and and for rent situations. But so that was great. We were able to finally find a place, but it came down to the wire, and that's about a 2-month process, which definitely accounts for a big part of our delay here. In getting back to the podcast, because then you got to move out of the place that you're in as well, and always a challenge depending upon how long you've been in it.
And then the irony of it is, well, maybe not irony is the right word, but at least for us, we're always thinking about sound.
Yes,
So there's an added piece to that where that's one thing I've found really interesting about in the rise of podcasting and home studios and that, and how just the sense of sound in the space that you live in and that you create in suddenly can often be, as it's been for us, it's a piece of what we're doing. The ambient sounds, and then how we did the last episode of the first season. We ended up doing just a quick. We had to go and record it at one of the coffee shops.
Right.
That is your company, and how that day we were just looking for a place to make it happen. Again, another segue. It was very improvisatory.
Yeah. It was. And that was definitely fun to do, and I think it'll be interesting as we go through with this conversation. How we'll find our own aesthetic niche within this soundscape.
That's a very nice way to put it. And one thing I want to add to that too is just when we did do that episode, how we navigated that. I thought that to be probably one of the most telling things for me to say, yeah, we can keep doing this podcast.
Yeah.
Because we both had this very calm attitude of problem solving. Mm-hmm. But also we also very quickly realized some of our bottom lines.
Right.
This is not good enough. We can't do it here. Great. Let's find something else.
Yeah.
Driving around the city.
Yeah, that was a fun day. I won't say we wound up back home, but we wound up at a place that we originally didn't consider.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be great for what we needed at the time. So that worked out great. The last thing that sort of happened to me too during our hiatus was unfortunately my mother passed, and that in the middle of our move and in the middle of organizing things, so just the amount of things that triggers in terms of your own. Forget about your emotional capacities and your emotional response to things, but just the practical nature of time and commitment added definitely another complication to our delay. So, after many years of her being in care, she had a day where she took a sudden turn, and within 3 days of that, she was gone. So, we've been in the middle of a grief process and also a taking care of business process. So as we've kind of wrapped some of that up, and I'm not saying we're getting back to normal life again, but, life goes on.
Yeah.
And being creative is a big part of how I deal with life, and so that, getting back into your creative self is only going to serve to help me learn about and address how I'm going to process that event as well. So this is great, again, to share this moment with you and to share this new creative space with you. And I couldn't ask for a better friend to be here at the table, and really looking forward to our discussion. So
I appreciate that. And, like I said before, the whole navigating doing a podcast with you or creating stuff with you, I recognized early on that there was a longevity to it, right? I think, when if you've lived long enough, maybe you start to notice like some of your, like I said before, bottom lines. And if a person meets them without you even having to talk about them, those are very strong indicators. Oh, okay. This is how he's going to play that out.
Right.
But in terms of, what you've gone through recently in your life and what you will be processing, I'm as happy to be here as you are. It's just, I'm in a different element of that. Right. Where there's that other piece about creativity where it's not just about you creating something. There's always that relational piece. And when you're making stuff with other people, when you're creating stuff with other people, their lives are in the room with you. It doesn't matter what's going on in their life.
Right.
Their life is there with you. And so it's a meeting of lives. It's not just, let's make this product, right?
Sure.
Let's output from our inputs. It's not so straightforward as that.
Yeah, because these conversations are, yes, they're inframed right now on the internet as a podcast.
Yeah.
But these are moments in our lives. This is a conversation we're having as part of our lives and a part of our relationship, and that it exists as this thing called a podcast is just sort of a framework through which other people view this. But this this isn't just a product. This is a moment and of a lived life, a lived experience here. So
it's the tightest weave of that nexus. Is calling it a podcast.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
Like all these other tendrils of the tapestry just aren't in it.
Right.
But they're informing it.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Can't you hear the echo?
Yeah. Yeah. Please, please email us at sonicventurespodcast@gmail.com and let us know what you think about the echo, which I'm sure we'll address by the next podcast, but maybe not. Who knows?
We could go with it. We could roll with it.
Yeah.
So
here we are.
Speaking of things coming together,
yes,
and producing the unexpected.
Holy cow!
Yeah. Bitches Brew.
Bitches Brew, Miles Davis. Yeah, so this is recorded, in 69, yeah?
Yeah, it was released in 1970.
Yeah, 1969, August, the weekend before Woodstock.
Yes.
Interesting enough, and basically right at the beginnings of man's first steps onto the moon, which also happened in that same window of time. Mm-hmm. And of course, my birthday, the year I was born. This is the
real segue that he wanted to get to.
That's right. September 5th, 1969. I whenever I hear anything to do with 69 and Woodstock for me when I was a kid was a big event. It sort of, I definitely saw myself sort of as part of that event, bookmarking the beginning for me. That was kind of my mark in time.
Are you saying that you're the Woodstock baby? I think there were more of them.
Yeah, no, I'm not the conceived at Woodstock baby, but certainly I came into consciousness into a world that had already experienced Woodstock as an event. So that's my frame of reference whenever I want to sort of fix, what happened from this point on. I've got the moon landing, I've got Woodstock, but now I've got Bitches Brew.
Yes.
Three big, significant sort of new chapters. Fundamental changes in social and technological and sociological and I was going to say musicological.
Well, it applies.
Yeah.
So apart from your corporeal appearance at that time, when did Bitches Brew come into your awareness post your birth?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. I remember hearing Bitches Brew as a title. And before I'd ever heard the music. So I remember the album cover and this sort of Bitches Brew, which to me had this weird sort of Macbeth kind of relationship, so I saw it as something that was magical, but a little bit dark, sort of a little bit like sort of something is not quite, the same here,
Okay.
But I wasn't really conscious of the music until much, much later. Probably, even though I was a huge prog guy and a huge John McLaughlin guy, Bitches Brew, I probably didn't get a really good listen to it until university. Probably early 20s or late teens. Yeah. And then because I'd been such a prog guy and because I'd, been such a John McLaughlin guy as well, it was one of those things when I first heard, it's like, oh yeah, I get this. I know what this is, and so I'd kind of covered some of that territory, both in we'll call it, some of the reading and writing that I used to do. I was a big beat guy, so
Right.
so some of the cultural things that led to and were part of what Bitches Brew was, I'd sort of experienced already in other forms. That I in my own narrative familiarity with it, I kind of got to Bitches Brew out of sync with that. So it, when I first heard it, I didn't dismiss it, but I kind of like, oh yeah, I know this, I get it, and I kind of moved on fairly quickly. So it hasn't really been until you brought Pharaoh's Dance to our music discussion friend group.
Yes.
That I really went back and reacquainted myself with it, because I'd heard it a few times in the intervening years,
Right.
but I'd never had the opportunity to sit down and just take it in as a whole in repeated listens. I certainly hadn't done that, and your enthusiasm for Pharaoh's Dance was, I mean, it was infectious, but also it was like, it's like that little reminder, hey, there's that thing you need to go back and look at. Remember that? You remember that thing you kind of were going to go
yes.
look? Yeah. I kind of had
the tapping on the shoulder.
it felt to me like a tap on the shoulder. So my experience of Bitches Brew now has your tap on the shoulder attached to it, which is kind of nice.
I wonder what kind of royalties are in something like that.
On the shoulder tap? I don't know. Is that a BMI or is that an ASCAP thing?
I think it's fair use, so I don't get anything.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's interesting what you're saying about your first experience, because I would say I had something similar.
Yeah.
In that the title came into, I don't know where it came from, but I was conscious of the name of this album and that it was Miles Davis.
Right.
But I never saw the album, didn't hear it.
Okay.
And I don't actually remember the first time I heard it, because it appeared in just this moment, the time when I really first invested myself in jazz in a very, like, a more of a scholastic way, was when I was in college.
Okay.
And there was all kinds of jazz coming at me. So Bitches Brew was in the mix with everything from Coltrane and Coleman, Sun Ra, like all of it kind of, and I wasn't so concerned about putting things in time. I just wanted to digest all of this music.
Right.
So I don't know exactly when I heard Bitches Brew, but I feel that my attitude was like, oh, I've heard this.
Yeah. Okay.
But
so very similar.
So very similar. But then by the time I did 2 years of college, did music performance.
Yeah.
And while I was doing that, I was studying privately music composition with this composer / prof. And then when I went on to university, that was when I started studying composition. And I started to, at that time, I was already very deeply into the headspace of more art music, contemporary art music. Like tonality by that time for me was like not really all that big on the table.
Okay.
Like I was listening to Black Sabbath to finish schoolwork, and I still had all that other music in my life, but I was very, very heavily invested in the way out there of composition and stuff that was just, music theory that was based off of architectural formulas or forms of creation of music that were just timbral and textural, had nothing to do with harmonic or melodic considerations as they were conventionally. Mm-hmm. And in that time, I started getting more and more interested in doing free improvisational music from that contemporary art music lens. And I actually ended up I was in a duo with a friend of mine, and we actually did improv, which we'll probably talk about more. But just to get to the Bitches Brew bit, it was at some point while I was in university that Bitches Brew showed up It was just, and I was listening to it, and I something hooked me. Something said to me, wait a minute, there's something more here. That was, I don't know who was tapping on my shoulder for that.
Yeah, but something was.
Something started.
Okay.
And then Bitches Brew started to become something different than everything else to me because it legitimized everything.
Right. So it was sort of like a cipher key, or was it a Rosetta Stone, or was it...
Now I feel like we're trying to write a script.
Yeah. or was it just stone tablets?
I don't know. But one of the first things I wrote down in my notes when I started doing the process for this conversation was that it just justified for me anything.
Right.
It justified tonality. It justifies no tonality. It justifies a straight pulse rhythm. It justifies completely polymetric, polyrhythmic thinking. Mm-hmm. But, of course, there's other things that I could draw that from. But for some reason, it was the hub of everything.
Right.
And when I said, like, I've never had this conversation with somebody, I'm being truthful. Like, I've kept that to my chest. And it's not because it's like a big secret.
Yeah.
It was just something that happened of its own. And so over the years, when I've listened to Bitches Brew, I actually have listened to it almost like it's just this friendly reminder of keep going.
Right.
It's very interesting to me how...
So it's got this aspirational element to it, in a way, yes?
I don't know if I'd say aspirational. It's more like, okay, how about the tap on the shoulder just ends up resting the hand on your shoulder? It feels, to me, like that. Bitches Brew feels very warm and nourishing and supportive, but it's not telling me what to do.
Right. So it's a different energy. It's not
Very
an energy to
so.
push you towards something or to give you momentum.
Exactly.
It's one to make you feel relaxed in the space that you're at or in the pursuit you're already in.
I think that's very valid.
Okay.
But I would also like to add to that I don't know where that itself will lead me. You know, like I don't even want to I appreciate, like I love the way you said that.
Yeah.
But I don't want to presuppose that's what it is.
Right, because as soon as we burden it with language and try to frame it as an idea or a concept, that puts limitations on it. And for you, it's I think that would be against the spirit of it in some ways.
I would say that is the personal talisman of it for me.
Yeah.
Like I love to talk about it, but I'm certainly not here to figure it out.
Right. I love that word, personal talisman.
Yeah, it really
talisman
feels
is
like that.
Amazing idea.
It is.
Yeah.
I think so too. And so my initiatory period with it was I think there was some similarities.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? So when you talk about hearing it or listening to it at that point in time, how? Like how did it physically come to you? What were you listening to?
Cassette.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've never held the actual album.
Okay.
And I've never listened to it on vinyl. I've only heard it on cassette and CD. So
cassette as in you bought or someone gave you Bitches Brew on cassette, or did someone record Bitches Brew and give it to you on cassette?
I've only ever had it on like a mixtape situation.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was the beautiful thing about college, not university, but college. At least for the people that I was engaged with at that time, there was a lot of nice sharing going on of music. I mean, of course, you had your haters and your little elements of personalities not jiving.
Yeah.
But I felt really fortunate that I met some people who were, they were around the same age as me, but more so, they just had this really nice open curiosity. So anyways, that's how I got a hold of it, because they had it it was actually recorded on the cassette off of vinyl.
Okay. Yeah.
So I had the vinyl sound in the cassette format.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. And yeah, there was a certain magic about being able to dub a copy of something to share with someone, because even within that, without getting into all the file sharing and tape copying arguments, when you gave someone a tape that you had dubbed or made or a copy of, there, even though it was for a lot of people the only copy they would ever listen to or hear, there was also that sort of thing that sort of, it almost invited you to go seek out a legitimate copy, or there was always this one step beyond that, a commitment to this physical thing that was out there in the world that you could acquire at some point.
And they would write with their own hands.
Oh man.
What's on the cassette, and then if they had a sleeve, they'd write down all the names of the tracks.
Wow.
And so I'm with you there, and this is a nostalgia.
Yeah.
But I think there's also this really nice aesthetic of, like, when people used to write handwritten letters. I mean, they still do, but very few people do. And like, for me, I have a few letters that my grandfather wrote that, like, I just like to look at his handwriting, because it's another kind of cipher for me.
Yeah.
But what you're saying about mixed tapes is that it always, for me, I always felt like there was this little, depending on the relationship, but there was always a little bit of intimacy there that was beyond the music. It wasn't just like, here's the album, here's the tape. You know that the person went through the process of listening to this become a new recording.
Right.
They put in time. And then they wrote down, if they did, track names.
And they become part of the story of that album. Like, like whether it's the hand on the shoulder, they are now attached to that artifact that you now have in your hand, and the meaning of everything is inextricably linked to that.
Just as you're saying it reminds me of when we were talking about Dark Side of the Moon, our first episode.
Yeah.
And I had discovered it on the backside of a mixtape that had Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms on the other side.
Wow.
So you're right. Like, there's this wonderful, very organic, in terms of memory and meaning, that happens with that kind of sharing.
Right.
With, the whole cassette thing.
Yeah, and of course, people may or may not be familiar with the book and the movie High Fidelity, all about mixtapes and what mixtapes were.
Which have a revival right now.
Yeah,
apparently this is merchandising we should be looking into.
Yeah. Well, I just got my a cassette deck repaired, so All right, well, I've got one, so we can start trading mixed tapes or something. Yeah, this will be good. going old school. The only thing with the mixtapes, which is also another interesting thing when we shared music that way. Now I can burn you a copy of something. I don't have to play it or listen to it to do it.
Yeah.
When I made you a mixtape.
Yeah.
That was usually real time, unless you had some serious dubbing action going on with high speed cassette decks and stuff. Like, you were listening to the music that you were recording, so you were actually capturing an element of your own experience onto that recording when you passed it on. And
that's the part of the intimacy. Yeah. It's almost like the music came through their ears first, and then yours.
Yeah.
It's really kind of amazing, and I'm right now I'm thinking about this one time. One of my ex-girlfriends from back in the day, before she became my girlfriend, she asked me to make her a mixed tape of Mozart music from the movie Amadeus.
Okay.
Because she didn't know anyone but me that not only listened to classical music but knew things about it. Mm-hmm. And right now that you're saying this, I remember the feeling of, as I was making that mixed tape, I was wondering, is this a way for her to see me again? Like, it was almost like the process of making that tape was part of the courtship, while I wasn't sure if it was happening or not.
Right.
And in the end, it was.
Yeah, of course it was.
Very funny. So, having had this time with Bitches Brew to listen to it and navigating the rhythms and shapes of life as you did it, where are you with this album?
Yeah, just a small question. A couple of things that interested me throughout the journey of listening to this album over this time period was, one of the things that I've been interested in all along with our discussions about concept albums is just how the experience of this as an album, like, how one would have experienced this album in 1969 or 1970.
Yeah.
And the different ways in which I experienced the music on this album versus the album, there's, and one of the things that I found that is this album, if you just put the album on to listen to the album casually, it's very easy to kind of lose your focus with it, because it takes a certain commitment of time. It's a double album to go through the whole album. So often your listens start with the beginning.
Yeah.
And you run out of time somewhere along the process, whether you've fallen asleep or the phone has rang or that, you need to carve out some time to experience the album as the album. So I had these experiences where first I was looking for these ideal times to try and experience this album as the album. And trying to line up these like sort of idealized listening moments to unadulteratedly get the experience of the album that way. And that proved to be hard to do, just with the busyness of my lives, and certainly with all the things that I was dealing with. So I started to change how I did that, and started to look at the album as sides and discs, and that opened up. That opened up the experience of the album for me in so much more accessible ways. And I thought, well, this is a function, a sort of a natural derivation of how I drilled into how I would and did experience this album. If I'd picked it up off the shelf in 1970 as a young person listening to this, I think I would have naturally gravitated towards that sort of side at a time or a disc at a time. And so I don't think I cheated the process by sort of falling into that. I think that was that was where that process was going to lead to me. So for me, where am I with this album? You could equally ask, where am I with the music or with the sides? Because there's different answers and different experiences there. So
that's cool.
As an album, I'm still quite in awe at the breadth of it, at the reach of it, and when you consider that each track equally has this sort of breadth and reach within it that is causing me to ask questions and go on these flights of fantastical thought and meditation as I listen, and the fact that then those are part of a larger album, whether they're part of a single disc in a 2-album thing, or they're part of the whole arc of the multi-disc experience. It's very it's just very interesting to try and give a short take on where you are with this album. I would
never ask you any question thinking it would be a short take.
Yeah.
But I got to ask the question.
Yeah, so sorry.
That's
so
no
sorry.
good.
I'm a little wordy sometimes. But,
no.
Yeah.
Because I think what you're expressing has a great deal of validity, right? And it's not because well, I could say in a way that I would not expect it of you.
Yeah.
But that's part of the reason why we're doing what we're doing, right? We are, these albums to us are very much like journeying.
Yeah.
And one journey doesn't sit on its own. And if there's multiple journeys with that album, they're all going to inform each other.
There's a polyphony or a polyphony that is obviously sonically a part of these albums. There's a similar multiplicity of that as just in the experience of listening, because depending upon how you listen to music, like when I listen to music, my brain sort of abstracts into multi-layered, simultaneous sort of thought and follow patterns. So I'm listening to individual instruments simultaneously and sort of tracking journeys, which then it's like, traveling in a train and looking out the window inspires thought. So that's happening in the music as I listen. Yeah. I'm seeing the journey, but I'm taking 10, 20, 30 journeys simultaneously. So this multiplicity of sort of cinematic and emotional experience is sort of occurring, which very much mirrors what I think is actually happening in the music. The music itself is that, so it's like it's probably one of the most obvious and closely associated times that my experience of the music has matched or been at least in spirit looked something like the music itself that I was listening to.
Interesting.
So it's for me, it was like as I listened, I was getting a reflection. I was hearing and it being inspired to think about simultaneously. So I was seeing myself think and hearing myself think and experience stuff. So it's like I was very much a participant the whole time, asking the question at the same time. It's like, what were these guys experiencing in that moment, as they were recording this, and questions of intentionality and stuff like that, and which are different questions and different tangent of discussion. But while I was sort of having those little questions, I was still utterly amazed at just like how cinematic and how simultaneous, how much simultaneousness or simultaneous.
One word that comes up for me is it's very multidimensional. It's not. And it's not even a fractal. It's like a multitude of fractals interacting.
It's dimensional fractals.
It's like just and what you are saying about that, your experience, that kind of goes in line with what, for me, anyways, what I said before about how it just legitimizes everything that I could think about with music and sound at different times in my life. And then when I found out, I didn't know this for a number of years, that it was edited. I didn't know that like there was musique concrète approaches put to it, and that just completely spun it again. Where for a few years I thought, they did this off the floor, which is technically true. But when Davis and Tio Maceo went and started crafting the album from what was there, they took the album to, like what I was saying before, this multidimensionality, just put it into a whole other headspace. Because when I learned about this, it was a few years after I'd finished university, and I had been studying musique concrète, and I had done it, and I was working in a number of different ways with music, and it was like the album had this extra gem in it that it didn't reveal, and it was just carrying it along, and so I'm imagining that maybe for some musicians of a certain intention or view would think that would be, sacrilegious to edit those improvs. It just, for me, opened it up even more into like I was speaking of that talisman for myself, is that the improv has been improvised again.
Right.
By that editing. So like you don't only have improvisational moments among the players. You have this post improvisational moment of Davis and I want to make sure I'm saying his name.
Yeah, it's right.
Teo.
Yeah.
That they in the studio with what they're doing, they're improvising because he was showing Davis some ways that they could edit it and shape it. And so, I think I also read there was some questions about his involvement in actually what the end product was.
Right.
Because they were looking at what was there and they were going through it and then deciding I imagine Miles Davis had the largest pull with that, but even just to go through that process and take the pieces and put them together however they would, that was to me, that's just another element of improvisation because they don't know in the end what they're going to end up using.
Right. And that sort of speaks to some of the criticisms, or we'll call it the dismissals of this album. So, you'll get a lot of people that listen to this album first that would just reject it out of form, reject this sort of meandering, improvisational, anything. Like, they... then you'll get people that are maybe a bit more snobbish in their quest for authenticity and their, we'll call it, I don't want to say deification of someone like Miles, of like the creative, but this sort of almost like mythological magic space that this all happened in the room in this way, and this is an unadulterated moment of inspired perfection, and that that the post-production craft element of it is almost sacrilegious to the sort of sacred mysticism element of everyone in the room creating this wonderful brew, right?
Yeah.
And so I love your take on it, where you just say, well, I could be that snob, but then I could just extend it and say,
be another kind of snob.
Yeah, it's just a further example of more improv, So it was everything it was, and now it's improv beyond that, and we could keep going because you mentioned fractals. This album is. I'm visually, I'm seeing fractals unfolding and creating, and as I listen, and it's just another element to that, another layer to it, another depth to it. So you could certainly, if you want to find your way through, even as a snob or someone with this idea of authenticity, of a purity of product, you could just look at it as another step in that whole fractal process, basically.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is the lovely part about how we human beings, but since we're talking about music, we musicians will go and do our own things even though others are doing their things. Right. That autonomy, but the collectivity at the same time, which is very fractal-like as well. And when I was listening to this for doing the podcast, I spent a lot of time thinking about what really is it about this album that moves me so much. I watched this really great video drum lesson by Gavin Harrison. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's played with Porcupine Tree, Pineapple Thief. It's a great drummer out of Britain.
Okay.
He's a very orchestrational, compositional drummer, which is what I really appreciate about his stuff. But in this video, he was talking about the difference between being impressed and being moved. And the funny thing for me about this album is that I don't think I have a clear idea if it's being impressed or being moved. So I guess it comes back to that hand on the shoulder piece.
Yeah.
But the time that I spent listening to this, I thought a lot about too. Some of what you're just saying right now is that when they went into that room to record it, it was a mystic space.
Yeah.
In that, let's just say that their commitment to the brewing of things. And so what I spent some time thinking about was, I wonder if maybe something that's coming to me is the relationships in the room through the music moments. Because most of the people who were in the room really knew each other.
Right.
There was only a couple people who were kind of new-ish to Miles Davis, at least.
Sure.
But for the most part, Bitches Brew, to a certain degree, I think, acknowledges lives lived together.
Yeah.
And relationships. And then what happens when you trust in the relationship so much that a new relationship can show up, even if it's only temporary, and you can all witness it, be a part of it, be of it, however you want to put it. And so I was thinking about how, like, I looked on YouTube for videos specifically of the players talking about the experience of this. And they all have their similar things, and they all offer their different things. But you can see they still feel that excitement or the visceral quality of that experience. Like, at least that's what I was getting from it.
That's what you were picking up.
That was I was picking up. And so I think one of the things that this album brought about for me was that relationship piece between people, because this album actually helped me to understand how misunderstood I had Miles Davis in my mind. Because before, this is before, getting ready for this podcast. It was a few years ago when I was actually looking for people talking about Miles Davis. I used to think that Miles Davis was just a leviathan of musical capacity, and he demanded it so much of other people that he terrified me. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, there was a period in my life where I loved Bitches Brew, but I would never want to meet Miles Davis.
Right, because he was a dark sorcerer, right?
It seemed that way.
That's what you thought.
Yeah. I wouldn't go so far as to say dark sorcerer.
Okay.
But I would say I would have no right to be in the room with him.
Right.
And then I came across an interview with Herbie Hancock. And he talked about how when he first started playing with Miles Davis, he had them come over to his house and play. And they started playing, and all of a sudden Davis threw his trumpet down and left the room.
Wow.
Yeah, and Herbie Hancock at the time was like, well, what happened? Like, what did we do? So they just kept playing. And then after a while, he came back down and then started playing with them. And it would be a few years later that Herbie Hancock learned that what he did is he left the room because they were doing what I had felt. I shouldn't be in the room with Miles Davis. Therefore, I'm not being me, because that's actually what he was looking for. So what I thought was technical prowess and high level of demand was a man with whatever his personality traits they would be. He was looking for what he couldn't do. That's why they were in the room with him. It wasn't because they had something that he knew that they had to provide him now. It was, I know there's something that could come through you that can't come through me, and I want to be in the room with it. And when I read DeJohnette, the drummer who's on most of the tracks, one of the drummers on most of the tracks, he basically described Miles Davis that way, is that he was trying to feel the essence of what was happening and then be a part of it. And so when I had that kind of click for me, it made Bitches Brew something even more. It was almost like I had to go through a little bit of just a short period of feeling guilty that I wouldn't recognize that. No, he's looking for things. He's trying to create context where stuff shows up that hasn't shown up before. But if one person or everyone is just tight and anxious or not at ease, it's not really going to show up. So listening to, like, for the podcast, listening to Bitches Brew, that was something I also took time to just reflect on, is like my own process with that. Like, so this listening actually became very, very, like, another level of personal for me. It, we've talked about how there's only so much of other people's views or research that we want to do.
Sure.
Because we want to focus on the personal experience. But I think I went really deeper than I ever have with any of the other albums. So just to bring it back home with what you said about how your mind and the music had these wonderful mappings, I think I've also had some beautiful emotional mappings happen for me.
Yeah, that's lovely.
This time with it, yeah.
It's interesting with each track, you've got some flavors within each track that kind of give kind of a suggestion or a color scale maybe, or a swatch to sort of start with.
Right.
And then as you start to listen, your experience through that color kind of evolves and morphs into other colors, but it may or may not have, whether it's an autumn theme or, so, you know what I'm saying? Like it may still be part of a color gradient or a color,
right.
Or maybe not. It just how some of those elements sort of at least give the beginnings of a flavoring, or the beginnings, like, that initial push in it's, I found myself at first wondering, like, well, what's my favorite track? Right? It's like, that's like, that would seem like an obvious question, or, what's your favorite? And, and then what does each track do? And it's like, it's so hard to even conceptually kind of talk about it without just saying the same thing that we've already said. It's like each journey is so individually sort of, unique to itself, that although it may or may not have these sort of common color or starting points or whatever, where you go, especially if you're thinking fractally, you can't guess, you can't replicate, you can't summate, or summarize.
Yeah, what you're saying talks to something that I did. I spent the time listening to the 3 albums that lead up to Bitches Brew. And so that's Miles Away, Feed the Kilimanjaro, and In a Silent Way.
Silent Way, yeah.
And I was listening to them, and I started to notice that something's not right. Like, really, I felt like something feels tight or restrained. And then I had this analogy for what I was hearing, was that the first 3 albums are almost like you're walking through an arboretum, but Bitches Brew is a wild jungle. So if you go into an arboretum, you're going to see that plant. You're going to see some of that, those organic life forms.
Yeah.
But you're not going to be in a jungle. You're not going to be in the wild. You're not going to be where things will come together in ways that you couldn't even imagine, because they have to have the freedom of their wildness.
Yeah.
And so when I was listening to the Bitches Brew after going through that process of listening to those 3 albums, that imagery really kept coming back to me many times. It's just like how, like, my brother and I, when we can, we will go for, and I do this on my own too, go for forest walks.
Right. I talked about that before.
Have I talked about it on the podcast?
No, maybe not.
Oh, okay.
But you've talked about it to me, so yeah.
Oh, all right, close enough.
Yeah.
And you can just see the way that things interact. Like if you go and look at a tree in an old forest or in a new forest, you're going to see stuff growing on the trees that is so different. So in a younger forest, you might see, okay, there's a lichen, there's moss, there's a fungus. But then when you go into older forests, you see, well, there's a lichen, there's a fungus, and there's a moss, but I don't know what's happening between them. And so that was another thing that came up for me with Bitches Brew, is that there's such life. There's so many different forms of life sonically happening in it. And one of the things that came to me about that, and I wanted to really get into this with you, was how he doubled up on the drums and the bass and the keys. And, Ornette Coleman had already done that, with his double quartet concepts. But I was just thinking about how, and I believe Sun Ra had done it, I think, before it happens on Bitches Brew. But I love thinking about how by doing that, you upset what is supposed to be the foundation. What is supposed to be the groundwork of what you're doing is in the rhythm section, right. Whether it's harmonically, whether it's based in time, forget melodicism, just that undergrowth of what you're creating. So if you have two drummers and suddenly they don't know what we're going to play, right, and they've never really done this before, where they have to find space for each other while it's happening. You have the same thing with the bass player, and you have the same thing with the keyboard player. So you are going into primordial territory. It's almost like you're going into a quantum layer of interaction. And I draw the same, I go right back to, it's not just only quantum. I think it's got that organic living mixture where novelty happens. So that whole process for me was really, really exciting.
Yeah, when I considered that, like you mentioned, the convention of what the rhythm section is, and how, I don't want to say dominant, but how like the drummer in the rhythm section can have such a dominant role.
They
and
very much
the bass
so.
player having his own dominant role, but attached to their personality, right? Attached to who they are and identity. And that this, by putting two of them together in those roles, and the piano, which arguably is the harmonic instrument in jazz that is polyphony, now guitar later becomes more of that, and if it had been recorded in the late 70s, they might have had two guitar players or three guitar players to need to pull that apart as well. But yeah, those three instruments in particular, forcing them to find their way and to deprivilege in the individual playing the instrument at the time from being too overly dominant or in the moment. Again, not quite the right word I'm looking for, but just this. You
mean the word dominant is the right word for you? I think I understand it in that, because I was thinking about the drums.
Yeah.
And we've talked about recording and how most people don't appreciate how actually when you have music that has drums, like a drum kit, it really is the metric to the rest of the sound. What's gonna happen sonically. So I was thinking about how these drummers show up with their kits and they haven't even tuned them together.
Yeah.
so I think the word dominant is useful.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you're using it in terms of ego.
No.
I think you're using it in terms of function and role.
Exactly.
And so if you have two drummers, like I love listening to the drum parts on this, because there's the visceral piece to it, and there's the emotional stuff, but then there's even the pragmatics of how you can hear one is on the ride, the other one went to the hi-hat.
Right.
And one is holding eighths, one's holding quarter notes, and how they work that out in the time of recording it.
Right.
But I do like your use of the word dominant because it also speaks to what I think is a very slippery slope of a relationship with an instrument, is that you do dominate it. And I think that a recording in a process like this, no one's dominating anything.
Well, when you consider the maestros and masters at work here, and their propensity, and their will, I don't want to say will to power, but their will to be who they are in their instruments, having to suddenly fall in sympathetic step with someone that would be, not just with the band, which is that's what a band does, is comes together sort of in sympathetic steps, but with someone who's got your role as well,
exactly.
And so there's another layer of breaking apart and reconfiguring that dynamic and those roles into the brew, right?
And to go to that, there was one anecdote that I came across was Don Alias, who played percussion. He played conga and that. When they were recording, he had this rhythm for the kit that he thought would be perfect. And he got on the kit and he started playing it. And Miles went, "That's it." And then he told him to show, I think it was Lenny White, what it was. And Lenny White started doing it. And I believe the story goes that Miles said, "No, that's not it." And he put Don on the kit. And he played that part on the kit for the recording. So there's the school ground ego that you can easily fall into. What are you talking about? I'm the drummer. It's bad enough that I don't have something to read off here. I don't know what we're doing. Plus, you're kicking me off the kit. I think that's part of the bit I was saying before about the relationships.
Yeah.
The trust for, I would say, I'm totally putting my own views into this, but it's not a trust in Miles. It's a trust in the moment. Right, it's a trust in the experience. It's a trust in the relationship. I think there's a beautiful alchemy in the playing of music. I mean, we can do it in other ways. Human beings interact in a lot of different ways. But there is that beautiful thing with music whenever you can choose, I'm going to trust this person, I'm going to trust myself, or I'm just going to trust the moment.
Yeah,
and I think people who really love improvisation, it's not always the case, but at least in my experiences, a lot of the time, it's they actually just want to be there.
Right.
They don't really, at least the people I've enjoyed improvising with the most, they don't really look at themselves in the same way as they might in other situations, and they just, okay, this moment is happening. I'm in this moment. And when I read Dejanet's speaking about Davis kind of running the sessions, and that seemed to be a lot of it. And when you have Lenny White was saying how his direction from Miles Davis at one point was, "You're a salt." That was it.
Yeah.
There was hardly any music.
Yeah.
Of any kind. I know I got the chords that Chick Corea said that Miles told him to use and one in a couple of the tracks, but for the most part, they were literally brewing something.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you said alchemy, right? And that's a great word for this, and in all its magical and mystical connotations, as well as its mathematical connotations. It's there's a lot going on. I like the idea too of this of sympathy and in sympathy, and it made me think of the vibration of sympathetic strings, right?
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
And something,
resonance.
Yeah. And so when you put these guys together and they're playing together, this other vibration is happening, this liminal vibration. But it has to, it's reflective of what they're playing, right?
Yeah.
And it's the congealment and the sort of sinking of this through time that just creates this other magical element that's happening.
Okay, I need to ask you a question.
Okay.
So you have used the word liminal many times.
Okay.
So in this case, how are you using it? Like, what is it referring to?
So when I talk about liminal, or I'm trying to introduce the idea of liminal to someone, I'll say liminal is the when the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's what is that? What does that mean? Well, that's a liminal idea or liminal space. Like where something can be more than the sum of its parts, which mathematically doesn't.
Right.
The liminal is that unquantifiable element where we get the sense of where the whole can be more than the sum of its parts.
Right.
But, so what that is, what that extra bit is, or that, that additional is the liminal. So in this sense, it's that, the idea of sympathetic strings and vibration. It's this other thing that is happening that is not a quantity of 1 + 1 = 2.
Okay.
It's 1 + 1 = 3.
Okay, I'm really glad that you explained that.
Okay.
Because for me, the liminal means like a threshold, a transition.
Okay.
So I'm glad that I, because you've used it a few times. So I'm really curious to find, because I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think that, again, being tapped on the shoulder or the hand on the shoulder, as I've talked about, is a feeling of more than the sum of the parts.
Right. And we've talked about a little bit about Henri Bergson, right?
Yeah.
And we talked about la
But you
durée.
have.
Yeah. Well, about la durée, which is this
Yeah.
sort of existential element of experience or time that's different than clock time. And that's a liminal space idea, right? So it's again, it's sort of this way to allow for something to be in sort of a almost metaphysical sense while you're still in the material world. So it's like it's this metaphysical.
So actually, that
acknowledgement.
But I would think then that does resonate with the idea of transition.
Fair enough.
Because I know that there's lots of words have lots of baggage. So does this one, transcendence.
Mm-hmm.
So I would, because transcendence is also a word that I would associate with a threshold or like a transition.
Right.
And what I like about what you're saying is that which is ineffable, that's it. So there's nothing to be done with it.
Yeah.
So that was, that's always been one of the things I've loved about improvisation, is that it's almost like going into a casino with house money. And I don't care if I win or lose, because the money's going to stay in the casino anyways.
Right.
So I was just there for the experience of seeing things move, right? Or the money goes from my hand to the table. The cards move. Like it's almost like improvisation is. I just get to be this conduit, and there's nothing else about it. There's nothing else to really invest myself in with it.
Yeah.
And I think that when I do that with other people, it just raises the bar for me on, I can't grasp that. But I know that I've had an experience, and there's things about it, and I felt certain ways with it, but I'm just not going to bother grasping at it.
Yeah, there's so much to say here. Like,
we have some more time.
You said that, this album itself is, like all these guys came into the room with sums, right? With musical ability, right? Mm-hmm. With their knowledge and their experience and their history, and their various aptitudes and physical abilities.
Yeah.
And then they had histories of playing together, right? But as they came into this with all those things in the moment, those are that's the sum, right? The things that you're summing up. There's Bitches Brew came out of that, but it wasn't a math equation.
No.
Right? Like you don't take it's not as simple as adding up those numbers. Something else happens there. And when they leave the room, you could argue they take their numbers with them. All those elements they brought in, they take with them. They also take maybe what the experience of whatever happened there for them, whatever they learned or whatever they experienced, and they put that in their trick bag. But something happens in that moment. Something is created in that moment that is, that does exist independent of all those things they brought in, but can't exist without them.
Yeah.
So it gets created and sort of in an ethereal kind of way. It's there, and as they depart from it, very much in the way we talked a little bit about Heidegger and being and this idea of the nothing, and as things start to, it's your departures. You're walking away from something, and or something is moving away from you, and your tricks and your bag, that you see it distinctly different, and you get a sense of what it is. So I imagine that as these guys walked out of the room, where was this thing? How did this experience?
And then just hearing what the end result of the album was, and it's not the same thing.
It's not.
Yeah.
And that's
even more interesting.
That's like this twist, at the end of the process, because there is that kind of magic, mystical experience that we just talked about that happened. And then something else happened as well. And it's all part of something that we have access to a certain degree, through recollection, through from reading and listening to them talk about their experiences, and then from our own sort of imagination of what those experiences are.
Yeah.
But yeah, what an amazing thing that would have been when they heard it for the first time. I would have been interested to hear more about how they reconciled their experience in the room with their post-room experience of reckoning with what Bitches Brew was as an album.
So I like the way that you've talked about the leaving of the room, because this is something that I had to process for myself in my own life with music and playing. Was I don't leave rooms, I go into another room. Because the leaving part, for me personally, when I didn't get to it like how you've spoken about it, but it's the same thing, where I realized that it's like this. It's the difference between saying I'm not going to put my attention on this thing versus saying I'm going to focus on this now. Because if you say I'm not going to put my attention on this thing, you have your attention on it. But if you say I'm just going to focus on this, that thing that you don't want to focus on, it's not even a thought in your mind that you don't want to focus on it, because you're full of the thing you want to focus on. So what you said about them leaving the room, for all we know, maybe that's where their heads were. There's like, well, I got another thing I got to do.
Yeah.
But I think what you are saying is fair, because I've had a few sessions where I've played parts on guitar that were going to be messed around with by someone else, and I have to let this go. And I found it to be an incredibly great exercise, because I didn't leave it, right? I just went on to the next thing. I don't have to think about that now. Okay, it's going to go do whatever it's going to do. That person's going to edit it or throw some effects on it or whatever they're going to do, and then I'm going to hear it. But I don't want to hear it as I played it. So that adds a more fractal spin, I think, to what we're talking about. And you're right. Like, there's just so much to talk about with this album.
Yeah.
And as we are closing up a bit
Yeah.
on our time for the podcast proper,
Yeah.
I think that even now, after what I've gone through with getting ready for this podcast and how I talked about how personal this experience has been for me with this album again, I still don't know why. Like, I still don't know why. Because, like, there were other people doing improv, you know, Ornette Coleman, and like I mentioned, Sun Ra, they were doing stuff that was definitely in this purview. And often this album is talked about as the precursor to fusion, which is, I mean, with music history, there's all of these little arcs that connect, and I don't think you can ever really put your finger on it. It's like saying, when people say that Black Sabbath invented heavy metal. No, they didn't. But I get what you're saying. They established something that just shone out. I get it. But I think with this album, I still don't know what it is about it that just, apart from how it makes me feel, like I get this feeling of support and encouragement or nourishment from it. But what you said about, you know, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, I think that's speaking to that as well.
Yeah.
It just, and there's a smokiness in the mix, in the room. And one of the images that comes to me with this album as well is that when I listen to it, I often see the image of a workshop. Like, I don't know how true this is. I feel that from the anecdotes I've heard, there is that feeling in it. But it really strikes me as I'm going into where things are built. I'm going into a place where it's dirty with dust or metal files or whatever, like it's a woodworking or metal workshop or whatever it is. There's all of this amazing work that's going on to create something, but then you see the mess of what makes it possible. There's just something about that image for me with this album.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just, like I said, ongoing process. Bitches Brew.
Yeah, so I think that's probably a wrap for our discussion here right now. Of course, we will be having our aftercast discussion immediately following this.
We got lots to talk about.
Absolutely. And just to anyone who's listening, the aftercasts are available on our Patreon account. And for a small Patreon membership thing, I don't even know.
We can soundproof this room.
We can buy some acoustic panels. But those are available to you. And, you know, feel free to check those out. You know, this isn't a money-making venture for us, but we did want to add some structure that let people go deeper into what we do through Patreon. And so as part of that, you get a whole additional discussion that sort of follows from this one and goes sometimes more interesting or deeper personal spaces. It goes. There's a little more flexibility in
and then there's the extra content of things like our vignettes. And our wild cards, which there's definitely going to be some for me after this. Yeah,
well, there's going to be lots for sure. But yeah, so feel free to check those out as part of, if you're digging what these are and you want to hear more. Either way, we're happy to have you join us in any capacity as a listening audience, and you know, thanks for sharing our journey with us. So
and we, just as an addition to that, we also love to hear from other people with their experiences. Like, we've had a few people reach out and just tell us how they felt about the album that we talked about, but then also some of their own journey with it. And we love to hear about that stuff and engage with people around where they are with stuff.
Yeah, please. And you know, the more people that engage with us, you know, the more we can find ways to engage with them. because we would love to get more of a dialogic, sort of element to what we do here. It would only enrich our conversations for us further. And so, absolutely, the door's wide open. Reach out and share and engage with us, and we'll be happy to engage with you.
Most certainly.
All right, Joël. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. On to the aftercast.
On to the aftercast.